Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is the Executive Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Partnerships at the British Columbia Institute of Technology. Kory Wilson is also an educator with more than 20 years of experience in post-secondary. She's a former family law and criminal defense attorney and a mom. Kory Wilson joins us today from Vancouver. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start by asking you how you go about defining reconciliation, because depending on your story, on where you are in your life, your experience, all of us have different definitions of reconciliation. What is yours?
Well, first, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Musqueam territory, which is the territory near UBC. If people know, I'm sure most people know where UBC is. But yeah, reconciliation, that's a question I get asked a lot. What is it? What does it mean? When will it end? Will it end? I think as human beings, we like to have we categorize things and like to know the answers to these types of things. But the reality is reconciliation is many things. And I think in many ways isn't something that can be easily defined or put into a box. But often the way I think of it is reconciliation is any action that will lead to Indigenous people having full access, full inclusion, righting the wrongs of the past, changing the socioeconomic indicators that we have. Reconciliation is a process that leads to some kind of outcome or deliverable where Indigenous people are fully included and fully being able to be self-determining in a country that is obviously on our territory.
So building on that point, then, how would you characterize where we are on this journey of reconciliation?
Well, I have to always be hopeful. I mean, there's certainly there's many frustrations around it. We know the Truth and Reconciliation report came out in 2015, and there's a lot of conversations around what has been achieved, what hasn't been achieved. I think we have to look at it in a multitude of perspectives. As from an educator, from me being an educator, working in the education system, working with young people, working with the team that we have at BCIT, the level of awareness has risen because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I don't think there would have been a search for bodies at the residential schools. I think that Truth and Reconciliation Commission has definitely woken up people's eyes, made them understand that there is a history in Canada that they didn't know about. I know in British Columbia, one of the things that has been really heartwarming to see is that it's mandatory to have Indigenous content in all curriculum, all subject matters across all grades. And we're seeing the result in the kids. Like I ask, colleagues of mine and friends that I work with, if you need to know something, ask your kids. And they do ask their kids. So that the generation now in British Columbia that's going to graduate from high school is going to have at least a basic minimum understanding of Indigenous people versus what was happened before. So the Truth and Reconciliation on all levels has raised awareness about the history of Canada. I think it probably could go in some cases there's great strides have happened, and in some cases we've gone backwards. So depends on what we're talking about, but we have to keep being positive, and we're definitely in a different situation than we were 10 years ago, and I'm sure 10 years from now we'll be in an even better situation. And it's important to keep it all in perspective and know that we all have a role to play in reconciliation and in making sure that Canada truly is an inclusive, welcoming, accessible country.
When you talk about we all have a role to play, what do you see as a parent's role in that specific equation?
Well, I guess as a parent, I mean, we all know that it's probably the greatest job we've ever done, but also the most challenging job we've ever done. And if you go down to what truly do you want your child to achieve? And I know we can get hung up on their grades or being first in class or getting into a certain university or a certain job or being a hockey person, going to the NHL. But when it gets right down to, I think all of us want our children to be good human beings and we want them to be happy. So in terms of a parent's role and responsibility, I think is to do that, is to make sure and expose their children to all kinds of ideas and experiences and thoughts, even if they're vastly different than their own, to teach the child that they have, you get more out of doing service than not. I had 3 rules for my kids. Don't lie to me. You must do well in school, and you must do service. Doing well in school, by the way, doesn't mean get straight A's, doing your best in school. But the third one was doing service. And I think we don't put enough emphasis on that. And time again, study after study has shown people get more out of giving to others than they get when they don't serve. And so you want to raise good human beings that have an understanding of the world, have an understanding and an appreciation of their own privilege, of their own bias, of their skills and abilities. We know sometimes kids have a false sense of who they are. And when they feel uncomfortable, or when they're first confronted with challenges, then they often retreat to bullying, or retreat to putting other people down, right? Like especially with social media and all of that type of stuff. And, so a parent's primary responsibility is to raise a good human with good values that understand all human beings deserve equal opportunity. And with Indigenous people, and I appreciate that parents may not know because they didn't learn it in school, or they weren't exposed to it, or they're newcomers to this country, but there's so many resources out there to start learning. And I do think that's a parent's responsibility to make sure their child is exposed to as many things as possible and as many experiences as possible, and that they're held to be accountable to be a good human being.
In the multiple roles and the multiple perspectives that you bring on this topic, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see parents falling into when it comes to reconciliation? And again, teaching their kids about it.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that parents necessarily make mistakes in it, because when people know better, they do better. Even myself as an Indigenous parent, as an Indigenous person to Indigenous children, my children are half Kwakwaka'wakw and half Haida. We all make mistakes as parents. So I think that's a number one thing, is know that you're going to make mistakes, and that it's about how you recover from those mistakes, and how you forgive yourself and move forward to do something differently. So when it comes to learning or teaching your children about reconciliation, it's having the courage to do that. So to be bold and courageous, and say to your kids, you know what, I'm not really 100% sure about this, but this is what I've read. Maybe we could do research this, or, watch a movie together, a movie that's just out, as Bones of Crows. It's an incredible movie. And they're making I understand CBC is also making a series of it. It's about residential school. It's a very profound movie about a topic that, of course, is really, really challenging. But watch it with your kids and talk to your kids about it. And even if you don't know the answer, tell them, I don't know the answers, but I'm going to find out. I think another pitfall, of course, that happens is when parents teach their children, whether overtly or without their knowledge, unconsciously, perpetuate the biases and stereotypes about Indigenous people, and say, oh, well, look, they're so lazy, or they're drunks, or, oh, they get a free education and they don't pay taxes. Well, so that's also where in this work that parents really need to, and everyone really needs to check their own privilege and their own bias, and raise their own level of understanding and awareness about Indigenous people, so that they're talking about the truth. Or if they hear their kids, it's the same in the LGBT community. Sometimes kids use terms that they shouldn't be using, or your 80-year-old grandfather uses a term that should not be used. What do you say about that? What do you do about it? And kids are always looking to you to see how you handle that. So I think it's being bold and courageous, being willing to say when you don't know something, and being willing to explore things as a family, and really set the tone. I mean, parents set the tone of what matters, right? If you're commenting about, if the only thing you say to your daughters is, oh, you're so beautiful, oh, you look so beautiful today, well, that's what she's going to start to value. But I'm sure she has a brain, and has all kinds of other talents and skills, right? So it's really encouraging the kids to follow and learn about things that they maybe don't know about.
It's such an interesting dynamic as you describe it, in the sense of young people today having this issue in front of their faces more so than their parents, right? And so, in many households, the inference is that the parent, in many cases, may be learning from the child. So, I wonder, like, what do you see in terms of where the conversation could or should be going within families, within households, as a starting point, because we can only really control to some degree what goes around on within our homes.
Yeah, I think the starting point is being bold and courageous, being honest. Whether that's the parent understanding that they need to have their own learning, reflecting on their own knowledge, their own abilities, their own skills, but really having those honest conversations. And, when we have Thanksgiving coming up and families gather, and, I know sometimes with my students, when I used to teach, I would say to them, they'll come, it actually quite often, they would come back from Thanksgiving and say, my uncle said this, is it true about Indigenous people? So we have older family members that have different perspectives, just like parents do as well. But the place to start is to really just listen and have those open, honest conversations and look to explore. I mean, people read bedtime stories to their children. What books are you choosing to read, right? Again, what do you listen on the radio in the car as you're driving to soccer practice? What movies do you go to see? What do you, when you do, Friday nights are movie nights? What movies are you watching? So it's looking to do this, and of course, not just for Indigenous, but for other groups of equity seeking groups. It's extremely important. And I think every parent wants their child to succeed and wants them to be successful. And the reality is a child that is more aware of others, and maybe in a way you could say more aware of differences. And therefore, the more you're aware of it, then often the more accepting you are. And the more successful that child is going to be, whether it's in the workplace with their colleagues, whether it's in the classroom when the teacher's exploring a particular topic. But we want to have people that we want to raise human beings that, again, understand service, don't view that certain groups should have certain rights over other people, that we're all human beings, and that there is a global perspective. I mean, Canada accepted 1 million immigrants, newcomers last year. That is a record for Canada. They are coming with incredibly different, vast experiences, which of course parallels the incredible diversity of experience and diversity of cultures and Indigenous people across this country as well. All of it has value. All of it has something to contribute. And I know we talked about diversity is a reality, but inclusion is a choice. And that's also what we need to do. Diversity is good. Diversity is good for innovation. Diversity is good for expanding. It's good for creating societies that are more inclusive and more accessible. But we have to choose to ensure that we have full inclusion.
I'd like to pivot a little bit and ask you about some of the statistics, because I think they really do paint a very stark picture for people who still maybe aren't sure of how to be honest about this conversation with themselves or with their families. So when you talk about the legacy of colonialism, can you take us through some of the statistics that really are stark and impact you personally with respect to that impact on Indigenous peoples in this country?
Well, the reality is that every socioeconomic indicator, Indigenous people are at the negative end. There are very few, and the only indicators I would say are the ones that I know of are where Indigenous people have more children on average than other Canadians. But we're at the negative end of every socioeconomic indicator, health indicators, justice indicators, education indicators, you name it, we're at those ends. And those are really, really huge statistics. We make up 5% of the Canadian population. We are the fastest growing population in Canada, but we make up 5%. And anybody who's done statistics in university knows that there's a standard deviation. I'll be generous and say 10% is allowed, but we have statistics in this country where 65% of the children in care are Indigenous. In some provinces, 90% of the children in care are Indigenous. There's prisons as well in this country where the vast majority of inmates are Indigenous. Indigenous people are more likely to die at the hands of police officers at a significantly higher rate. My 3 Indigenous daughters are 7 times more likely to be murdered and raped than any other group in this country. Those are horrific statistics. And this is all happening on land that belongs to us. This is all happening on land that is now called Canada, that belongs to us. So these statistics are horrendous. And people often say to me, oh, well, Indigenous people, they just need to get an education. Well, again, there's barriers that prevent us from achieving the same rate. Nobody's going to say at least I hope, nobody's going to say Indigenous people are not as intelligent, or they're more criminally inclined, or they're worse parents. That is not the truth. The reality is the acceptance, and what people have to understand is there is systemic racism and discrimination built into all of the systems that we have in Canada. Because I don't know how else you explain anything over and above 10% representation of Indigenous people. So there is stuff going on. There are systemic biases, policies with built into all of our systems. Those barriers must be addressed. And the reality is, and one of the things that, this is where I talk about too, everybody's role in reconciliation. One of the fundamental roles that you can play, or the steps that you can do and advance this role, is to accept and understand that there is systemic racism and discrimination, and ask yourself what you're going to do about it, and try to figure out how to get through it. And that doesn't mean people are intentionally going out there. It's just, and then it's also about recognizing that you are benefiting, if you're non-Indigenous, you're benefiting from a system that allows you to benefit over and above Indigenous people. So it's being honest about that. I don't think the average Canadian goes to work and implements a policy or does a hiring practice within the intent of excluding Indigenous people, but that is the result. So how do we get how do we change and get rid of those barriers, those systemic barriers? And that's what we all have to work towards doing. Because the statistics are horrendous. And I was very fortunate to be with the Native court workers at their celebration event last night. They've been around for 50 years. When they began in 1973, there was about 35 to 40% of Indigenous people in care were Indigenous. Of Indigenous people in care in British Columbia were Indigenous. And now the statistic in British Columbia is 65%. So what is happening? We need to address this. And then, of course, all the other, stereotypes that we see. Indigenous people pay taxes. Indigenous people don't get free housing. Indigenous people don't get a free education. Of course, there are circumstances where some of that can happen, but it's so small and so minute that we have to get rid of these types of statistics. And, when people, I live in Vancouver in the downtown east side. All you have to do is walk around the downtown east side, and, it's mostly brown faces down there. And, we're not there because we are more prone to drug addiction or more prone to this or that. There's a whole systemic challenges that have led to all of that. And it's up to all of us to make a change and write those statistics.
You talk about the statistics. You've talked about your family as well in terms of your children. I wonder if there are any lived experience examples that you can share involving your children that you believe really should all give us pause as we continue on this journey of reconciliation.
Well, certainly in terms of my kids, I mean, one of the things that's happened, of course, it's just been summertime. My kids are very dark, and, they get asked, I can't even tell you how many times they get asked, are you part Black? Are you part this? Oh, you shouldn't tan so much. Why does somebody talk about that? Why do we talk about that in 2023? There's all kinds of reasons people's skin look the way they do. And that's a common one that happens. But yeah, they've been in situations where they also, sometimes people don't realize they're Indigenous, or they don't even think about it. So they hear that side of racism. They hear what people say when they think no Indigenous person is around. One of my daughters was accepted to a particular school. She was told that she only got there because she was Indigenous. And yet when you look at the rankings, she was ranked in the top 3. So she was going to get into that. It had nothing to do with her being Indigenous. Another one of my daughters was in a class, and There was a non-Indigenous person that took offense to the fact that the word Indian was used in a book, in a reading. They were reading out loud from a book. And I certainly appreciate the use of the word Indian and where you use it and where you don't use it. And it's certainly no one probably listening to this podcast should use the word Indian unless they're saying the Indian Act, right? Or anyway, so she was in a class, and this well-meaning person said, stop, we can't. I want you to say the I word. And he went on and on and on. She was the only Indigenous person in the class, so she made a comment. And she said, look, I'm the only Indigenous person in this class. It's important to keep that word because it's in this book. And the reason we're reading this book is because we're trying to learn about this and learn about the severity and the colonization and all of that. And then after that class, I guess he found her in the cafeteria and pretty much attacked her and said, how dare you make me feel like that? How dare you not tell me you were Indigenous? And she's like, how dare you assume I wasn't Indigenous? So there's a lot of those kind of personal incidents that happen quite frequently. And it's challenging. It's challenging when you hear, the stereo. And of course, we know other ethnic groups face these types of things as well. But it's the subtleties. It's sometimes high school teachers said, oh, well, just because you're Indigenous, oh, you don't have to worry about getting a scholarship because you're going to get a free education, right? So it's an extra, and that's what I mean. So privilege, why I think getting people to understand their privilege is extremely important, because that's a privileged position to say something like that, and you shouldn't do that, right? So my kids have regular kids things that all kids have to deal with as children, as young people, but then if you're Indigenous, there's that added layer that has to be constantly dealt with. And sometimes my kids have dealt with things because of me, right? Oh, well, are you going to go tell your mom? Oh, like, so there's that type of stuff that happens. And it's we really, and when it happens from adults, it's really, really disturbing. Why would an adult say certain things that they say to children? You can understand children between children, but again, where did that child learn that from? So again, going back to one of your original questions was, what is the responsibility of parents? The responsibility of parents, again, is to raise good human beings, but not perpetuate the biases and stereotypes that they may have, that they know or understand, and get their kids to have an open mind and not bully on those types of things or, make those comments.
Now, you have a grandparent who is a residential school survivor, and I'm curious as to, in what ways did your upbringing has that impacted how you are raising your children? And certainly in the times we live in where we are having this conversation, but you and your family have had a history far preceding where we are today.
Well, I think the way it influences, obviously it influences in terms of, all of the challenges that come and the intergenerational trauma and those types of things, and trying to break those, some of those cycles of dysfunction that have been passed on. One privilege that I have is I have two parents that never went to residential school and that have university education. So my path to education was not something that I had to forge by myself and figure out on my own. So that was a very clear path for me. And that's obviously something I'm very grateful for. But I think the positive of residential, well, sorry, let me clarify that. Not the positive of resident, but the positive of my upbringing from my family was that we were raised with a great sense of responsibility, a great sense of duty and honor to our ancestors and to those that went before us. I know what my grandmother went through. I had conversations with her. I have my dad's brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles and cousins that went to residential school, and I know their stories. And my life, though at times may be challenging and hard, it's infinitely better than theirs. And so I think that's one of the strongest influences, raising with a sense of responsibility and duty to make the world a better place, but at the same time to make sure that I am grateful for my life and to keep my life in perspective, and not recognize that what I'm dealing with or what I feel is hard and challenging, um, keep it in perspective and know that it's not like I'm not in residential school. My children are not in residential school. They can go to university. They have, they have things I never had as a child. And I think that's what we all strive for as parents. And so I think that's been a great motivator, and my children, raising them to do the same with service and gratitude.
With respect to your role at BCIT, I wonder if you can take us through some of the actions that you have taken along with your colleagues to actually affect lasting change where it concerns Indigenous initiatives.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful and very excited to be at BCIT. I always say our team BCIT. I'm very proud of them and very grateful for them. We've created an Indigenous vision that has all kinds of actions in it, and we really are looking at actions that lead to only to sustainable change. So, in terms of the general things about raising awareness, helping people understand, participating in culture, meeting with elders, all of those types of things we're doing and continue to do. But we've created an Indigenous vision that also ties into with some measurements. So with the excluded staff, with our performance evaluations, they're asked what what have you done to advance the Indigenous vision? We've asked all schools and departments to create reconciliation action plans, as we call them. So they all have, because again, it can't just be up to me to indigenize BCIT, or Tammy Pierce, who is the associate director. So we need everybody across BCIT to do this, and it's been fantastic. So now we're involved in almost everything. So everybody's operating on that nothing about us without us principle. So we're involved in everything, and sometimes it's a little much. So for example, we're building a new trades and technology complex. It's going to be fantastic and wonderful building. So I know a lot about piping and electricity and all of this type of stuff that I would never know, but they have us on their committees as well in consultation, because how do they make it reflective of the place and space of the Coast Salish people whose territory that we're on? And we consult with them and bring them in, and we're looking at language, and we built a health sciences building with our full participation in it as well, so it reflects the place and space. It's been really a really fantastic process. The HR department, looking at how do we hire, how do we recruit Indigenous people, where do we reach, what are the biases in our hiring processes, working with the unions, working with their processes as well, and so having those meetings with them. We're going to be we've got a new president now, so we'll be doing a second Indigenous vision, but it is all about making that sustainable change, which is beyond giving BCIT an Indigenous name or just adding content to the curriculum, which of course we're doing as well. But it's about how do we change the policies and the systems and the procedures at BCIT with that Indigenous lens, and really what we're doing is having bold and courageous conversations and continuously consulting with each other and communicating. That doesn't mean we haven't made mistakes, and that doesn't mean it's a smooth process, because there are people who are resistant to it, but it's just continuing those conversations and not allowing it to get buried, and addressing it head on, and have been very grateful and satisfied at BCIT how the team has responded and is embracing this. And also we provide the space for people, if they don't know something, to say, I don't know. Okay, well, let us help you. Or if they say, I disagree, okay, let's explore, right? So again, bold and courageous conversations and remembering what we're all here for. So it's been really, really good. And we're moving a lot of things forward and hopefully changing the face of post-secondary education.
As we all move forward toward reconciliation, what would you say gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope is that it's part of the conversation, that people are talking about it, that people, and not just governments, but the average person is talking about it. The average you go, even like take my kids to a soccer practice or a swim team practice, right? And somebody will have the courage to ask me a question there. So these conversations are happening. These conversations are continuing, and we are seeing incremental changes occurring. Some are very drastic changes, but we're moving towards that direction, slowly but surely.
Kory Wilson, Executive Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Partnerships at BCIT. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspective with us today.
Thanks for having me.